Hello everyone and welcome to our Kotlin Bootcamp, and I'm going to be guiding you through this 5-day mini course in which we're going to learn the basics of Android app development using Kotlin, and we'll actually build a full Kotlin app from scratch together in just under about 2 hours of video content. So I've just prepared a few slides here, and this will just explain a little bit about the course itself, what we'll be covering, what we expect you to learn throughout. And first of all, we'll start with our teaching style. So the way in which we'll conduct this tutorial will be an over-the-shoulder kind of style. We're actually going to build this app with you in real time so it's easy to follow along. Now this means we're not going to be copying and pasting a bunch of code from elsewhere. We'll actually type out line by line what's going on with you so that you can follow along and so that you don't have to keep pausing it and trying to play catch up. Now we're also very explicative in that we explain exactly what's happening at every step along the way and what each line of code that we write is doing. This way, hopefully you won't be left wondering, well, why exactly did we do that task? Because if you know what's going on from the start, then it's easier to understand the more complex tasks later on. And we're also going to try an exploratory style in that we're going to show you how to perform the first part of a task. We'll explain perhaps what the next step will be and how you might go about implementing it. And then we'll actually get you to try it yourself before providing a solution. So this means that I'll explain what you need to do, give you a few seconds maybe to pause the video, try it yourself, and then I'll provide the solution and explain exactly why we did what we did in that solution. So I'll go through it with you guys. Now, this course is for you if you want to learn how to build Android apps with Kotlin specifically. So we're not going to be providing Java or iOS support or any of that. We'll be looking at Kotlin development for Android apps. Now, if you don't have a ton of experience with Android development, especially with Kotlin, you're always keen to try out new concepts that you just learned right away, and you're a hands-on practical learner, then this course is perfect for you. Now, we don't have a lot of prerequisites. In fact, any prerequisite material that you might need is provided for you. So I expect a basic understanding of how Android Studio works and how the interface works in general, how to create new files, where to find what we need, and of the Kotlin language basics. So this doesn't mean that you have to be a seasoned Kotlin developer, but I'd expect you to know how to use variables, functions, how to create arrays or lists of objects, custom objects and classes, and so on and so forth. Now, like I said, we've actually provided all you'll need. We have an intro to Android Studio and an intro to Kotlin language basics, so I would strongly encourage you to watch those beforehand if you're not familiar with these topics. Now, I'm going to be recording everything on a Mac, which means that the Android Studio version I'm going to be using is going to provide the Mac interface, but everything that I do here can also be done on a Windows PC. This is the great thing about Android Studio is it can work on both Macs and PCs, and actually the interface doesn't look totally different. So it will look a little bit different, guaranteed, but the functionality will be just about the same throughout. Anything we can do on the Mac with Android Studio, we can do on a PC and vice versa. Now, some of the major topics we'll be covering are, first of all, how to build an app from scratch in Kotlin. That's the overall theme of this tutorial. So we're going to be covering every part of this process from the UI construction. This is going to be building up the layouts for all of the screens that we'll need. We'll implement UI interaction, which means attaching stuff like listeners, importing variables that we'll need so that we can change the UI and make it responsive and adaptive. We'll learn how to implement backend functionality. So this is going to be any functionality that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that the app works properly. And this includes communicating with this on-device database that we're going to be building and using. We'll actually build this completely from scratch ourselves, as well as all the functionality to do stuff like add items, fetch items, update items, as well as delete items from that database. And by the end, we'll have a fully finished to-do list for Android devices. That's going to be the app that we'll be building, will be a persistent to-do list in which you can record items that you'll need to do, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, and so on and so forth. You can mark them as urgent, provide a date, and it's just a way to keep track of a busy schedule. Now, we'll be doing this over 5 days, and so we'll be kind of allocating each task to a specific day. On day 1, we're going to be building the main layout pages and adding listener functions and variables. So this is going to be working mostly with the UI, just providing a bit of setup so that in the next day we can start implementing the backend code. And that's exactly what we're going to start doing in the second day. We'll add what's called a recycler view adapter. So we can kind of think about this as a list view, and some of the UI elements, including a list view, need what are called special adapters to kind of bind and populate the data. We'll also build up our custom to-do object. And so this will be kind of a mix of back-end and front-end communication. After this, we'll work on attaching some extra on-click listeners to our list to provide a little bit of extra functionality, and we'll also plan our database schema, so how the data is going to be stored, in what data types, and so on and so forth. After this, we'll actually implement the database functionality. This will be day 4 at this point, in which we'll not only implement the full database itself, but the way in which the rest of the code or the rest of the app will communicate with that database. And finally, the final day, because we'll actually have a fully functioning app by the end of day 4, the final day will just be on improving what we already have. So adding features and generally improving the app, maybe improving the UI, making it a little more responsive, a little more adaptive, and just a better app all around. This is generally the way in which we implement or the way in which we build any kind of an app. We start with the UI, implement UI communication, implement the backend functionality, and then end up with the polished app, or rather just polishing the app and finishing things off. Okay, so that's actually all the slides we have. We're now going to turn to Android Studio, where we'll just go ahead and start up a new instance. So I have a new window started. I'm using version 3.0.1, but it doesn't really matter too much which version we're using. Let's go ahead and start a new Android Studio project. We'll call this whatever we'd like. I'm going to go with to-do list. Okay, I'll just save it to the desktop for now, but likely we'll move it around a little bit later. We do want to make sure that we're going to include Kotlin support. And actually, let me just copy this and make a new directory there. Okay, I'll be using API 27 in my application, so make sure that this is selected. I'd recommend at least 26 or higher. We'll definitely need that for the recycle view and some of the other views we'll be adding. We'll start with an empty activity because we'd like to start from scratch and implement everything ourselves, and main activity is fine for the first name there. Now at this point, I am going to assume that, like I said, you do have a pretty good understanding of Android Studio and a fairly good understanding of the Kotlin language itself. If you don't know a lot about either of those topics, you've never really coded with Android Studio before, never used Kotlin, then please pause us right now and go back and watch our videos on an intro to Kotlin, intro to Android Studio. And in those videos, we'll explain basically everything you'll need to know to get started for this, because we kind of want to launch right in. If we only have 2 hours to build this app together, I would like to go as fast as I can, okay? Without confusing you, of course. I'm not going to go so fast that you guys will be lost. So while this loads up, again, I'll just explain where we'll be starting with this. We will be beginning with the UI construction itself, so we'll probably have a couple of screens at least in this application. We'll be able to add items to our app. That will be on one screen, and then we'll have the main display page on another screen. In fact, I can actually pull up a nice demo for you of something that your app will look like. It will look either exactly like this, or at the very least, very similar to it. So this is just my emulator that I have started, and you'll probably have something along these lines. So you have a list of items that you can view today. You'll have the item name itself. You'll have the date on which it was created, whether or not it was urgent. Okay. You can then modify an item by clicking on it. It takes you to the edit page. You can save those changes or cancel. You can add new items. Simply by pressing that, it navigates you to a new page in which you can enter a name, mark it as urgent or not, save the item, or just do nothing, navigate back. You can view items that you've created for previous days. In our case, I actually have no items I've created, and so on and so forth. So some pretty basic to-do list functionality. I know this might look like a fairly rudimentary app, but given that we only have like 2 hours to build it, I think it actually turned out fairly well. So let's go ahead and get started with the first section. We'll try to keep it to about 30 to 40 minutes a day. I will do my best to keep it as short as I can, but some of the tasks will take a little longer than just that simple half hour. Otherwise, thanks so much for signing up. We really appreciate the support. I'm very excited to be making this tutorial for you guys. I hope you're as excited to take it and to learn about Kotlin and Android development. It's a fantastic language, and I love building Android apps. So hope you share my enthusiasm, and I'm really excited to guide you through the rest of this tutorial.